Welcome to this episode of the Insurance Brokers Podcast. On today's episode, we are talking to Declan Murray of Willis Towers Watson. Declan is the marketing business partner and has spent 8 years with Willis Towers, and we're talking today about all things marketing in the insurance industry. Good morning, Declan. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Insurance Brokers Podcast. It's lovely to have you here.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me.
So we've had lots of offline conversations, all things marketing, and I thought it'd be a really interesting chat, really, to talk about the type of support that Willis Towers Watson gives their brokers, what your experience of marketing in our industry is and what kind of challenges often come up, and whether we can collectively give the listeners any kind of easy tips and advice on how they can boost their own marketing departments. So I wonder if you want to give us a bit of a background about where you are, how you've got to where you are in the last 8 years in Willis Towers.
Yeah, of course. Happy to do so. So I've been with Willis Towers Watson Networks, predominantly working with network members across the northern regions, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And my role is really about providing a holistic marketing consultancy service. And that's really looking at what a network member wants to do to grow their business and how they go about achieving it. And one piece of advice I give any broker looking to adopt a marketing approach is to be realistic and to understand that it takes time to go to where you want to get to, if that makes sense. Quite often there is an illusion or perhaps a disillusion that by doing an individual marketing campaign, the funds will jump off the wall with the vast responses you get. And the reality is that doesn't happen. It might happen if you're marketing Budweiser and on a Friday you tell everyone on Facebook that Budweiser's half price. You will probably see a big uptake in sales over the weekend, but that's a very, very different type of marketing. When we're looking at insurance marketing and financial services in general, you have to understand it's a different audience. It's a different buying process. You're effectively working around a 1 day of the year target, and that's when somebody's renewing. So all your marketing, in essence, is targeted at a 1 day event, and all the work that you put in is focused on that. And again, going back to the point I made at the very beginning, all your marketing should be realistic. And once you have a realistic expectation, it's very, very easy then to start looking at various ways and means that you can implement marketing strategies and marketing plans and bring them to fruition. So I hope that kind of gave you a little bit of a flavor of what we do. That's kind of the theory element of it. Practically speaking, we will work with our network members on putting together an actual plan of activities, and that will often span email marketing. So one of our services is a CRM system that's got e-marketing capabilities in there. It's looking at cross-selling. It's looking at developing a proposition for your business. It's looking at identifying what makes you stand out from the competition. It's also looking at traditional things like direct mail, telemarketing, more advanced websites, SEO-friendly websites. Social media is the big thing. And have you got a good presence on social media? Are you actually portraying your business properly on social media? Because that's where everything's happening right now. And going forward, it's going to happen a lot more on social media. And our brokers, and brokers in general, need to be prepared for that. Because the decision makers of today may not necessarily use social media as a decision-making tool. But I can guarantee you in 10, 15 years' time, the next generation of decision makers will have been brought up on social media. They will know nothing else other than social media. So we have to embrace it. And a lot of the advice and work I give to our brokers is around that. And it's around looking at where you can stand out and create a difference. Because one of the things I tend to find a lot in our industry is if you look at different trade groups, for example, or different specialisms or different industrial sectors, and more times than not, there will be some type of group or some type of association on LinkedIn or discussion forum that you can join that's specifically related to a certain industry or sector. there's almost never an insurance representation on there. You'll have lots of accountants, solicitors, lawyers, various other professional services on there to talk about their expertise and how they can help this industry and what they do to support that industry. But almost never is there an insurance representative, which firstly creates a vacuum because there's nobody to give proper advice. And as we know in these industries, you need proper advice. More times than not, you can't just buy off the shelf. You need somebody to be able to give you good, solid advice. But because nobody's on there, you can very, very quickly join a group or a forum, as long as you know the industry, and create a digital reputation of expertise and excellence. And how quickly it moves, you could very quickly overnight become recognized as a thought leader or an expert in a particular field.
Have you come across this? Because obviously we're in the same field, we do some of the very similar things. One of the things that we found and is the LinkedIn groups, for example, there's loads on property, right? And everybody in those groups are trying to sell to property people, which almost deflects the property people. So you're in there selling, I don't know, unoccupied properties for whatever's going on at the moment, but actually you're selling to accountants and solicitors and blah, 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 all of whom are also trying to sell to the people that have now vacated because they don't want to be sold to. Yeah. I've come across that quite a lot. What's your experience?
There is a lot of that going on, and it can be difficult to really make a success of it, because when you're trying to sell someone to someone who's then going to try and sell something on, you don't have the same connection or connectivity to the actual end client, and it becomes almost a bidding war as to who can sell it the cheapest. And that's not what this industry is about. Price proximity is all good, but you need to, you're providing a professional service backed up by years of expertise, and that comes at a cost. And you shouldn't be afraid of that, because people are buying from people. You're buying under expectation that you know what you're talking about and you can back up your service. So I get a little bit nervous when things happen like that, and it's almost driven by price dominance rather than quality of service. So I do have a little bit of hesitations around that. I think to be able to go directly to the client is better, unless, and I caveat this to say, unless you've got good relationships with partners like accountants or legal firms.
Just back on the sort of LinkedIn groups, because they are, there is some value in even setting up your own LinkedIn groups to provide information to interested parties. And I've seen that work very well. But I have seen, the sort of industry specific LinkedIn groups eventually end up just a sales platform for everybody to that particular market. So, it kind of works both ways. But having said that, we've just doing some work with a client at the moment on a very niche industry that is more prevalent on Facebook than on LinkedIn. And there's a fabulous national group specific to this niche. And our opening is, I want to do a podcast with everybody on this group. I want to hear about this industry. I want to learn. I want to get more information. And that by itself is a very, very soft relationship opener with no sale attached, but it is the start of a relationship. So I wholeheartely agree with you. There are ways it can work. Just it can also go the other way. So it's worth checking out the group.
It can absolutely can.
Just so the platforms are obviously really, really important, and the platforms you've mentioned, email marketing, SEO, various social media, links with sort of big national bodies or associations and thought leadership articles in those spaces, all really, really good stuff. Can you talk to me a little bit about the strategic planning and work that you guys do prior to that? And I'll give you an example. Some of the things we do is we always do a bit of a sort of a brainstorm at the beginning, which is, so you want to grow, that's great. By how much, in which verticals? All right, 10% in property development portfolios. Okay, great. So if we look at an average conversion rate of say 1 to 3%, how many people need to go in the top of your funnel? Let's find that amount of actual companies and actual people from which we can see which platforms are relevant. So that kind of thinking is often missed in my experience with businesses, whether it's insurance or otherwise, because that's not, you've got so many hats to wear, and that's one of the hats that falls off. What do you guys do to support brokers in that kind of initial, I want to grow, but I don't know how to direct it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'd always tend to revert to something that I was taught when I was studying marketing many years ago, is that it can be as complex as simple as you want it to be. And the approach I always take is to try and look at marketing as three components. And that component is your proposition, your audience, and the communication channels. So effectively, how you communicate that proposition to that audience, what methods you use. And then once you get your proposition right, which isn't that hard to do because we all have a proposition, more times than not in our business, we have a pretty good idea of who your audience is, because there will be people either locally based businesses or businesses within particular trade groups, or if you've got a certain scheme or a specialism, you're going to go after those type of audiences. So it's pretty easy to identify who the audience is. The key bit is actually figuring out what communication channel works right for which audience. And it's a mix. So if we're to look at it in a bit more of a scientific way, we purchase data, for example, I would say to an insurance broker, let's assume they have no idea who you are, because they probably won't, because they haven't done much marketing. And firstly, let's not look at this as a one-off campaign. Let's look at this as a 12-month project. So we have to assume nil knowledge at the beginning. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some email campaigns to begin to get some brand awareness moving. And let's get your name in front of them, so that if, when we look at the next element of this campaign, you will at least have some recognition with them. And we'll do a campaign, and we have various stats as to open rates and click-through rates, which we would deem to be acceptable. And then we'll implement a telemarketing campaign to sit on top of that. And we'll know that the telemarketing campaign could probably, if we're going for 100 leads or 200 leads, it will probably get maybe 10 appointments, 15 if it's really, really successful. So we know those metrics. And then to sit alongside or on top of the telemarketing, we might do a direct mail campaign. So having started with an audience of, say, 500, we will whittle it down to the most expensive element, which will be the direct mail, to probably only 50. But we will have warmed up the rest of them, and we will have created brand recognition. And we will continue to do the email campaigns because they're cheap and efficient and very quickly to deploy. And then next year, having done some of the hard work this year in ascertaining renewal dates and that critical information, when we do this next year, our whole marketing is going to be a lot smarter, because we know when people are renewing, so we can target and focus our activities around that renewal date. So again, it's all about being realistic with your metrics. It's all about looking at what you do to create that brand awareness, and that's your email campaigns, that's your website, that's your social media presence. But in order to bridge the brand awareness to money in, so actual generating income, there has to be some direct marketing, and that's always going to be telemarketing, either internally or externally, because you're going to have to speak to them at some point. Direct mail, attending events, arranging meetings, whatever it is. So as long as there's some form of expectation and metric appended to each of those types of communication channels, that's when it becomes more successful and realistic.
You've touched on something that I come up a lot against. It's a question that's often asked to me. Marketing in our industry has got a little bit of a fluffy reputation. And what I'm often asked, and you're talking about metrics, and that's the way we work as well, is how can I tell you that this marketing spend will generate this opportunity, closed business that's converted? And I think you're absolutely right. There's a process by which you've got to test that, but you should always be able to test it. Nobody should be telling you need to spend £1,000 a month and we're not sure what we'll be able to bring in. And I think that has traditionally been a bit of a problem. And you should absolutely be able to attribute a spend to a conversion. What kind of metrics do you guys deem as appropriate? What kind of things should people listening, when they're, looking at their marketing spend with whoever it might be, what kind of conversion rates do you deem to be sort of average or acceptable?
Well, I'm going to address the first point you made about the fluffiness. Yes, there is a preconception that marketing is all fluffy and colory and we make lots of nice adverts and that's it. The reality is the fluffiness element, if you like, is about 10% of the entire marketing mix. 90% is analytics, figures, lots of division, lots of question marks, and lots of testing matrices thrown in. I wish it was more fluffy, but it's not. It is really quite numbers based. So what I think metrics wise and looking at costs, again, it's a really difficult one to try and append on a single basis. And by that I mean, if I give you an example as to what I mean by that, if you run a TV ad and you've got an 0800 number, you can very easily say, right, we've spent £1,000 buying the space for that ad to run during Coronation Street, for example, and it costs us £1,000. It would actually cost you a whole lot more, but just for the sake of this example, it costs £1,000 to run it, and we got 10 responses. So those 10 responses ended up costing us £100 per response. The product we're trying to sell costs £500. So it's £100 for someone to ring us, but then we know that only 50% of them will actually buy the product. So in actual fact, it's costing us over £200 to get a qualified lead, but we're selling it for £300. So the marketing acquisition cost is almost 50%. So it's not worth doing it because it's too much, it's too expensive. That's a very easy way to measure marketing success. Where you have a service industry, it's a lot more difficult because you do lots of different things to try and get interest and try and get an appointment or ultimately a piece of business. So it's really hard to sort of say, right, well, if we do this one campaign, it's going to cost £500 and we're going to get 10 policies sold, so we know it works. We could do that having not done any marketing prior to it, and we might get 5 leads. We could have done loads of marketing in the background. We could have done email campaigns. We could have connected with them on LinkedIn. We could have spoken to them for 2 years trying to get an appointment. And then this year we try it, and all of a sudden, we're generating a lot more appointments because of all the work we've done. So it's a lot more cost efficient this time to do it. So, the metrics, you have to look at it in the longer term, and you have to look at it, I would say, probably over 3 years, because, you're not going to generate much in year 1. You're going to have a little bit more success in year 2. By year 3, you should then have done or be generating quite a bit of business, because you'll have established brand awareness. You'll have hopefully gotten to know the person. So it's harder. But if you want to look at it on a strictly cost versus response basis, yes, every year, every campaign you do, look at the amount you're spending, look at the number of responses you're getting from it, measure it, divide one into the other to tell you how much each response is costing you, and then decide whether it's profitable or not. But if it's not profitable in year 1, don't just write it off, because in this business, we renew. You're not going to have the same marketing costs in year 2 or year 3. So again, that's why you need to look in the longer term.
I think there's also a strategic piece around it, isn't it? So your customer acquisition cost does reduce over time if you keep the consistency up. But we did some work with a client not that long ago, and they wanted to put some PPC spend into a particular niche. And a very quick look at that showed us that the Google searches on that particular niche were about 90 a month, so very low. But some of the big composite markets were already playing at the PPC game in that area. That was a very quick search that can tell you you're never going to be able to match their spend, and therefore you're always going to come second down. So there's certain sort of levers that you need to really look at the strategic aim before you can kind of jump into doing all the metrics, aren't there? I bet you guys get quite involved in that as well.
Absolutely, especially around digital and online. I mean, insurance is number 2 in terms of the most searched for words in the world. not just in the UK, but across the world. So for anyone who hopes to sort of get to the top of the Google rankings on generic insurance terms, you have to be realistic and say it's not going to happen. Because number one, SEO is a dark art in itself. We don't truly understand what Google does to define a website's worthiness to be in the number one spot. There are common factors, but we don't really truly know. Number two, you have to have a lot of budget, a lot of resource, and a lot of time to invest in getting your website, up the rankings. And number two, you've got to maintain it, which takes the same amount of budget, time, and resource to do it. And let's be honest, that budget will have many, many zeros in it. Not 2 zeros or 3 zeros, but you're looking at 6 zeros to realistically try and compete. Now, PPC will obviously get you ahead of the game because it'll get you advertising. But PPC's conversions, if 70% of people will click on a natural listing ahead of an SEO listing. There is an innate distrust, I think, of certain PPC advertising because it is, you are paying to be there. So, the conversion rates are a lot lower. And I think, if you've got a particular term you're going after that's got 90 searches a month, then, what's the best you can hope for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the just going back to the sort of innate dislike of being overtly sold to is something that has sort of that change in buying cycles been coming for a long time, and we are very much now in a soft sell. Let me provide you with some really useful, really helpful, really good information or services or support without asking you for any money. And it goes back into the sort of the way you build trust, isn't it? The old trust equation, credibility, reliability, and intimacy divided by self-orientation. The minute that the person you're talking to feels that you're in it for yourself in any which way, it's a huge turn off, regardless of how credible, reliable, or intimate you've been previously. And I think that trust equation is quite a powerful one.
It is.
We do very much like you guys. We do some of that strategic analysis initially, and we focus quite a lot, like you do, on the metrics and the numbers. You cannot tell me that you want to grow without telling me how, in which markets, by what percentage, GWP or income, and then working out exactly how many you need to go in the top funnel to kind of spit out the bottom. And one of the things that we do quite a lot of work with clients with is going back to your earlier point of it's quite easy to identify your audience, but there is a second step to that. So if your audience is widget manufacturers between a 1 and 5 million turnover that sit in location X, wonderful. Now let's find who the names, the actual companies and the actual directors that sit of those companies that fit those parameters in that particular market. And sometimes that's quite a tricky piece of work. It's very time consuming. It's incredibly laborious, and it makes you want to remove your eyes with spoons, which is probably why it's a sort of stage that we'd rather not go down sometimes. But I think it's a really important piece of work, because once you know that it's, I don't know, Joe Blogs of widget manufacturer X, you can start to really understand what his pain points are. And does he sit on LinkedIn? Is he on Twitter? Is he on Facebook? Is he likely to sit in front of a laptop? Or, are you looking at haulage drivers, in which case email campaigns is probably not the best way to go down, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole piece of meaty, laborious and boring, but very strategic work that needs to go into the sort of the front loading. Do you guys get involved in that with your clients? Do you do it for them? Do you do it with them? Do you sort of coach?
You're absolutely right. It is incredibly laborious. The good sort of side to it is, there's obviously data companies who will provide this information, decision makers who sort of commonly accessed. LinkedIn is obviously a very good platform for finding people and actually connecting with them directly. And the more advanced LinkedIn navigation tools will make that search a lot easier. But it is difficult to do. It is time consuming. But if you look at the time and the cost of doing it and equate that to the opportunity cost of not doing it, and sitting on the sidelines saying, no, it's not worth it. It's too much effort. Well, somebody else is going to do it. And you can be absolutely certain in the way the market is right now, you can be 100% sure that your competitors are doing it. And there's nothing to say your competitors aren't looking at your clients thinking, I wonder what I can do to get in front of these guys. So you have to be ready to, get into the rough and tumble of it, and spend that time, or employ someone to spend the time to do it.
And like you say, there are some really, if sort of budgeting spend is a marketing spend is an issue, there are some really great tools you can use. So some of the ones that we've come across are, you mentioned LinkedIn and Sales Navigator. There's a tool called Whizzer that links to Sales Navigator, and it's 15 cents per legitimate email that it will charge you. So if you've done your Sales Navigator search correctly, you can link in with Whizzer and you can do, a per email cost of very, very low. And there's all sorts of customer engagement platforms. We use Artesian quite a lot with our clients.
Yeah.
There's companies like Hunter.io, Rocket Reach, or, for people listening, if marketing spend is an issue and you really want to do some work on this list, highly, recommend you have a play around with some of these software tools, because why would you not? Like you say, your competitors are doing it, particularly the market I say we're going into, but we're fairly well in it now. And I think it's probably only going to get worse over the next few years for a whole host of reasons. This piece of work is really, really important. So we've talked about the audience and we've talked about the kind of strategic planning around that. We've talked a little bit about the proposition. Let's delve on that a little bit more, because I find this quite interesting, right? I've spoken to lots and lots of businesses whose proposition is, we provide a really personal service. Okay. I also spoke to Simon Johnson, who's the marketing director of Markel, a few weeks ago. And one of the things that he was saying their proposition is, which I think is the way things are going, we provide this personal service. We're great with claims. And that's the standard. That's the expectation now. That is no longer your USP. That is what you are expected to provide. I think it's quite difficult, particularly if you are an independent insurance broker and you're sort of, predominantly maybe regionalized, your SMEs within that location, or you might have a few schemes. But how do you then pull out your USP, your real value proposition? Because it can't be any of the expected things. That's now not a USP. So I don't think it's quite so easy to go, I'm great at this, unless, and one of the podcasts I did was with Peter Cullum, and he said, you need to be top 3 in at least one industry. Just find a niche, top 3 in one niche. So that obviously starts to build in your USP or your value proposition. But how do you do it without that?
Okay. I want to begin by saying the service proposition, I've never been a believer in it. It's the easiest thing in the world to say we provide a fantastic service. And my response is, well, you should do, because I pay you enough money. Service is an expectation. You're absolutely right. It is an expectation. And when I advise brokers about developing a proposition, there's a number of ways you can look at how you develop a proposition. You can do a SWOT analysis of your business, and particularly looking at the strengths and the opportunities, then you can begin to carve out a sort of unique proposition. You can look at what your competitors are doing and ask yourself a very simple question. What are they better at us at? And what are we better at them at? I should ask 2 questions, not 1. But if you can ask those 2 questions and be very honest in the answers, that begins to craft a slightly different way of looking at a proposition, but it's something you can go out and really push. But the easiest, quickest ways of developing a unique proposition is exactly what you've said, is to have an area of expertise, an area of specialism, an area that not many people do, because that will give you, first and foremost, if somebody types in that type of service on Google and you've got a half decent website and you've mentioned it in your website once or twice, it will rank pretty quickly because of its uniqueness. So that will get you recognition. And by being an expert or a specialist in a certain field, you join the affinity groups and trade associations appended to that specialism, and that will get you an audience of the very people you're trying to target. Go down that route. That's the quickest way to get yourself a proposition that you can live and die by.
I think
Forget the service thing. That's just an expectation, as you said.
Yes, what you've said, I think, is absolutely really, really valuable. And to people listening, the SWOT analysis and the picking, one or two of your biggest competitors and doing that exact exercise is really, really powerful. I just tell you something else that we did once, which we've done a few times now, that has also been quite powerful. So one of the things that we did when we sat down with this particular client that it worked really, really well with is we took the top 20% income generating clients from their book and we profiled them, right? At the same time, we sat with all of the sales team. We did just a fun exercise. In your head, pick your favorite client and write their name down, and now give me the 3 things you like about them. Same exercise about your worst client. And what actually came out of that conversation was all of the sales team picked a client in the same industry, which was, that doesn't happen often, but it was, it did in this particular case. And all of them had something in their likes and dislikes about feeling valued by the client. So when I give you some advice, you really run with it, versus I've got to call 27,000 times and then they ignore what I've said anyway. And it was just a really, and then you looked at the top 20% income generating. There's a bit of profiling and that we could do there. And it was just, it pulled out such a strong, why is this, go get a scheme for this. This particular area is obviously your bag, entirely. You're good at it. You enjoy it. You can see the passion behind it. Go for it. So just, there's loads of different ways, aren't there? Like little games or exercises you can do that can inform what you as a business really believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think we're probably doing a slight disservice actually, focusing a lot on a specialism or a niche, because not every broker has a niche or a specialism or doesn't really want to push it. And to them, my advice is, service, let's park that because that's an expectation. But this is still a people business. And trust, longevity of, relationship, getting people to actually recommend you and give you testimonies is hugely important. One of the pieces of advice I give to our network members, when you're looking to generate new income or to acquire new clients, is to identify who your key clients are, write out to them and ask them to recommend somebody to you or refer somebody to you. Because what's the worst they'll do? They'll say no if they don't want to. They're not going to walk away and say, I'm never going to do business with you again because you asked me to refer someone. How dare you? That does not happen. Okay, it's not going to happen. If you have a good relationship with an existing client, you write to them, say, look, our business is built off the quality of product we provide, the service we give, and the relationships we have. Would you mind recommending someone to us? We'd be very much appreciative of it. And then you might think, well, okay, yeah, I can do that, but I'm going to have to give some incentive and it'll look tacky. I'll have to give them an iPad as a thank you, and it'll cheapen our brand. And it will cheapen your brand doing that. So don't go down the, I'll give you some high street vouchers if you do it, or you might be in with a chance to win an iPad, to the person who's probably got 15 iPads already. They don't really need it. So look at doing something like a charity donation to them as a thank you. If you recommend someone to us, we'll make a donation to a charity of your choice. So you get a new client, your new client gets a good service, and your existing client gets a donation made to a charity of their choice. So everybody wins. And it's a very, very simple, effective, easy to manage campaign that can be rolled out anytime.
Some of the best advice I ever got when we first started was from Kevin Hancock of U-Tree Insurance. And one of the things that he's consistently done throughout his insurance career is look for a way that he can give back to the community. So he's always been part of BIBA or the CII on various board members, but he's also then developed sort of local networking groups for local businesses that's not about selling, it's about supporting. And that links in really well with what you're saying. I love the charity donation idea.
You can have that one for free, by the way, but
Why, thank you. I'm very grateful. I think it sort of goes hand in hand, going back to the trust equation, sort of giving back, community, personal relationship building. I think it's all really powerful. So I think that's really, what you said at the beginning of proposition, audience, and communication is along the same lines we work. And I think they are really three key elements of marketing. So we've looked at the proposition and the audience, and we've kind of touched on communication. We break communication down into how and what, and we've done the how. What platforms are you going to disseminate information? I'd love to spend just a few minutes, I know I've taken up lots of your time, just a few minutes talking about what, because we do an awful lot of work on the what, as I know you guys do. And what I mean by that is, what information are you sending people via the various platforms that you've identified? And it's got to be valuable, informative, non-salesy as a predominant feature, just information for supporting that community. How do you work with your brokers to develop that type of communication?
Well, firstly, to pick up on something you said just towards the end of that question, non-salesy, that's the key. We're selling, but we can't sell. Okay, we're not pushing for sales. We're educating people, and how we educate people is through content. And that content can be physical content. It can be an article. It can be materials. It can be PDF from various trade sector groups, for example. But it's educating people. It can be video content, talking about a particular product or a particular service or a particular industry, and educating people as to what their insurance requirements might be if you're in a particular industry, and talking about it. So it's all about educating people. A simple equation I always use, or a sort of an example, is if you're going to make a big buying decision. So you're going to go out and buy a car, and you're looking at two choices, or two different salespeople, if you like, approach you. And one says to you, right, car is £15,000. Do you want it or not? Right. Chances are you're probably not going to want to buy it, because he's just there, it's 15 grand, that's it, take it or leave it. If another salesman came up to you and said, look, firstly, can I learn a little bit about you? So do you have kids? What ages are they? Let's get to know you. Let's get to know your family. Let's get to know as much as we can about you. And based on what you've told me, I think this would work for you. It's a choice. Now, I've got a few different choices, but I think this is kind of right where you need to be right now. I think this car fits your needs. And this is what it's going to cost. And we can help with that if you need it. Which one are you going to likely buy from? You're going to buy from the second guy, aren't you? Because he has educated you, he has listened to you, he understands your predicament, and he's trying to find the best solution. Now, there's no reason why you don't transpose that approach into every type of business that you market for, because it's the exact same principles that you use. You have to educate your clients. You have to get to know them. You have to understand their businesses. You have to understand the challenges they face. And once you understand all that, you can then provide content and material that's relevant to them. The worst mistake you can do is to be lazy and blanket bomb your prospects, your clients, with material that's relevant to maybe 5% of them. Because the other 95% will look at it thinking, you don't actually know a single thing about me. You're sending me stuff about risks on a building site, and I produce widgets in a factory. Why are you doing this? And it's laziness. And just get to know your audience, whether it's your existing clients who you should know already, but your prospects, get to know them.
That goes right back to that ball-breaking work for the audience section that just needs to happen. Something you just said there, which I think is really interesting. Almost every decision we make as human beings is made by emotion and justified by logic. And often, actually, there's an awareness. We're not aware of the fact that it is the emotion that's made the decision, because we're so busy justifying it by logic. And I think that's an interesting concept that you should be aware of as a salesperson, or as a business person. Made by emotion, justified by logic. And therefore, it's absolutely that approach where I feel you've got me. I feel that you care about my needs. I feel like you've understood my problems. You've listened to what I'm saying, and what you're telling me is based on all of that, rather than, I hear what you're saying, this is what I've got to sell. And that, that kind of divide is important. I think that has been really, really interesting, Declan. I love chatting to other marketing people. I always think I learn a lot and hopefully can participate some. So, really, really great. Really loved chatting to you, and I'm grateful for your time.
That's a pleasure. Thank you, Sarah. Really enjoyed that.